she saved 2 set points against the reigning champion, lost the lead in the tiebreak twice, and still walked off center court with the biggest win of her life. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how a 21-year-old ranked outside the top 30 turned an 84-minute opening set into the moment her entire country had been waiting generations for. Two names keep colliding. Alexandra Eala, the Filipina who trains at an academy in Mallorca built by a man who won 22 Grand Slams of his own, and Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, a 5-time major winner who was supposed to be untouchable on the biggest stage in tennis. These two had already split their head-to-head evenly, 1 win each. Neither had ever faced the other with a Wimbledon trophy on the line. So when the draw paired them in the 3rd round on July 4th, 2026, it wasn't just another match. It was on 2 different surfaces in 2 different years. Neither had ever beaten the other on grass. Unfinished business, and everybody in that stadium could feel it. Would this be the day Eala proved Miami wasn't a fluke? Or would Swiatek remind the tennis world exactly why she was still the champion? "I don't know how to describe it," she said afterward, still catching her breath, still somewhere between laughing and crying. She talked about sharing that court with a player she called phenomenal, a genuinely kind person, and admitted she almost didn't have the words for what had just happened. That's the strange thing about the biggest wins of your life. Sometimes they don't arrive with a clean sentence. Sometimes they arrive as someone standing on the most famous lawn in tennis, trying to explain a feeling that hasn't finished happening to her yet. Rewind 16 months. March 2025, Miami, a Tuesday afternoon on a court far smaller than center court. Nobody outside the tennis world was watching closely. Alexandra Eala, barely known outside junior circuits and academy scouting reports, stepped onto the court against Iga Swiatek, at the time one of the most dominant players on the planet, and beat her. It was the win that put Eala's name into every highlight reel that spring. It was also, if we're honest, the win everyone quietly wondered whether she could ever repeat somewhere that actually mattered. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about her career up to that point. Before this year's Wimbledon, Eala had a losing record in Grand Slam main draws, 1 win against 5 losses. She'd shown flashes, she'd shown talent, nobody doubted, but the moments where it counted most had a habit of slipping away from her. Isn't that the story of so many gifted young players? The talent arrives fully formed. The nerve to use it on the biggest stages takes years longer to catch up. Behind her was the NADAL Academy in Manacor, where she trained since she was a young teenager, learning the game inside a system built by a man who understood exactly what it took to win when everything was on the line. That mattered, even when it wasn't visible in the box scores. Because 2026 had already been a different year for her. She climbed the rankings, she picked up her first grass court title in Birmingham that June. She arrived at Wimbledon seeded for the very first time in her career, 29 on the draw sheet. And then she beat her second-round opponent without losing serve a single time, a performance so clean it barely looked like effort. The tour, quietly, had already started planning around her before this match even started. But nobody plans for a defending champion on center court. That's a different kind of pressure entirely. So the question hanging over July 4th wasn't whether Eala belonged at Wimbledon anymore. It was whether she belonged in that specific match, on that specific court, against that specific woman. The first set alone lasted 84 minutes, and it deserves to be walked through point by point because nothing about it was simple. Swiatek struck first, breaking with a forehand pass, clipping the line for a 2-1 lead, the kind of shot that makes an opponent's stomach drop. Eala answered immediately. She broke straight back, setting up the break point with a looping, high-arcing return that threw off Swiatek's rhythm completely, then finishing it with an angled pass off a drive volley that barely stayed in the court. From there, the set became a tug-of-war. Neither player was willing to lose. Eala's return game caught fire again, and she broke a second time to push ahead 5-3, earning her first set point of the match. This was the moment. Beat the champion here, close it out, and the story writes itself early. Instead, Swiatek reached into whatever reserve of quality got her 5 major titles and produced 3 consecutive forehand winners to save it, leveling the set at 5 games apiece. Isn't that exactly the kind of response that separates a champion from everybody else chasing her? The set went to 6-6, into a tiebreak, and the tiebreak itself became its own miniature classic. Eala surged ahead 5-2, playing fearless first strike tennis that had the crowd rising out of their seats. Swiatek clawed back, ripping off 4 straight points to reach set point at 6-5. One more point and the first set belongs to the champion, and maybe the whole afternoon tilts differently from there. Except it didn't end there. The tiebreak kept stretching, point after point, neither player blinking, until it reached an almost absurd 9-all deadlock, both of them trading errors and winners in equal measure under a tension that most matches never even approach. And then, finally, 2 costly forehand errors from Swiatek handed Eala the set. 84 minutes, 2 saved set points, a tiebreak that needed extra innings just to find a winner. The scoreline read 7-6, and depending on which broadcast you watched, the tiebreak finished either 11-9 or 9-7, a detail that barely matters next to what it represented. Eala had just outlasted a 5-time Grand Slam champion in the single most contested set of her career, on the lawn where it mattered most. What came right after told its own story. Commentators immediately flagged it as one of the tournament's genuine upsets, a signature statement win rather than a fortunate bounce. Fans back home in the Philippines flooded timelines the moment the score confirmed, turning Eala's name into the top trending topic across the country within the hour. Tennis writers who'd covered her Miami win against this exact opponent 16 months earlier were quick to note the symmetry, framing this as the sequel that finally mattered on the sport's biggest stage. And notably, that same day carried extra weight around the tournament. Serena Williams had to withdraw from her doubles match earlier that afternoon due to injury, and defending contender Elena Rybakina had been eliminated only an hour before Eala even walked onto center court. The day already belonged to upsets and shifting storylines before Eala added her own chapter to it. So by the time she stepped up to serve out the second set, the entire tournament's attention had quietly turned toward court number 1. Because here's where the match escalated even further and where the real statement got made. If the first set was a nerve war, the second set was a demolition. Eala broke immediately to open 1-0, held serve, then broke again to surge out to a commanding 4-0 lead. Just weeks after winning her first grass court title, she was now dismantling a former world number 1 in front of a sold-out center court, and doing it with a composure that looked nothing like a player supposedly still learning to close matches at majors. Swiatek, to her credit, refused to fold completely. She found a response, winning back-to-back games to trim the deficit to 4-2, generating just enough hope in the stands that maybe, somehow, this was turning again. But Eala had an answer ready. She reeled off Game 7 cleanly, then survived an absolute war in Game 8, a stretch that stacked up 6 separate deuces before she finally ended it with a forehand winner struck off her left hand. 2 hours and 15 minutes after it began, the match was over. Final score, 7-6, 6-2. The defending champion of Wimbledon was going home in the 3rd round. Now here's the part worth sitting with, because it complicates the celebration a little, and it should. Before this tournament, Eala's Grand Slam resume genuinely was thin. 1 win, 5 losses in major main draws. Her career high ranking sat at 29. Her actual ranking on the day of this match was 32, comfortably outside the traditional elite. Was this really a changed player, or was this one enormous outlier hung on the shoulders of a single golden afternoon? Skeptics inside the sport had every right to ask that question, because tennis has seen plenty of players produce one stunning upset and then vanish back into anonymity the following week. A win over a 5-time major champion doesn't automatically rewrite a whole career. It just opens a door. What happens on the other side of that door is still unwritten. But then you look at what actually surrounds this result, and the skepticism gets harder to sustain. This wasn't an isolated flash. It came off the back of a genuine grass court title weeks earlier. It came from a player now sitting at 7 wins against 4 losses versus top 10 opponents in her career, including a perfect 3-for-3 on grass specifically this season. And in her own words afterward, there was nothing accidental in how she framed it. She talked about how many times she dreamed of exactly this kind of opportunity, and how when a chance like this appears, you don't hesitate, you take it, because being here at all is already a blessing that took relentless work to earn. She dedicated the win to the Filipino fans who'd shown up in numbers nobody quite expected at a tournament this exclusive, to her family, and specifically to what she called the little girls back home with ruffled socks and round cheeks, who might now believe this path is possible for them too. That's not the language of someone who thinks she got lucky. That's the language of someone who has been quietly building towards this exact moment for years, and finally watched the pieces land. So what does this actually mean, stripped of all the emotion in the stadium that day? It means the Philippines now has its first player, male or female, to reach the second week of a Grand Slam in the modern era of the sport. It means Alexandra Eala's head-to-head against Iga Swiatek now sits at 2 wins to 1, with the 2 most recent meetings both going her way, on 2 different continents, in 2 completely different contexts. It means she now moves on to face 13th seed Jasmine Paolini in the round of 16, with a genuine chance to push even further into a tournament nobody expected her to still be part of this deep. And it means the quiet, patient question that had followed her career for 2 years, whether she could actually close a big match when everything was on the line, finally has an answer, written in ink instead of pencil. Because a signature win isn't really about the scoreline, it's about what it proves you're capable of surviving. Eala didn't get handed this match. She had it slip away from her twice in that opening tiebreak and found a way to take it anyway. She watched a champion claw back into the second set and closed the door regardless. That's not fortune. That's temperament, built one difficult afternoon at a time, at an academy far from home, under a coaching philosophy that has always measured players by how they handle exactly this kind of pressure. So here's the question worth sitting with as she heads into her next match. Was this the turning point people will look back on as the moment everything changed for Philippine tennis? Or was it simply the loudest chapter so far in a story that's still being written? Tell us in the comments what you think happens against Paolini, and if you want to be here for the next round, make sure you're subscribed before it happens.